you have to have a tremendous amount of patience. And you also have to be very focused on early profitability, because what you want to do is you want to buy yourself time to let the technology mature and the market mature towards you. And that can take over 10 years. It can take 15 years. But if your purpose is to redefine a market, you don't mind spending a big chunk of your life doing that. And that is this impatience for profit, patience for growth.
From the Grit Institute, this is the Grit Factor podcast. And I'm Shannon Huffman Polson, former Apache helicopter pilot, speaker, and author of The Grit Factor, Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the most male-dominated organization in the world. I'm also the founder of the Grit Institute, where I help purpose-driven leaders like you build grit and resilience and connect with purpose so that you can navigate transitions, overcome challenges, and lead with impact in your work for a better world. Today on The Grit Factor, we're joined by a leader who didn't just build companies. He reimagined what business could be when it's grounded in purpose and grit. Dave Wharton is the founder and CEO of the Tugboat Institute, where he champions a radically different model for leadership, the Evergreen Company. These are organizations built not for exits, but for endurance, guided by the 7 Ps, values like purpose, perseverance, people first, and paced growth. Dave's journey began in the world of high-velocity venture capital as co-founder of Drugstore.com, associate partner at Kleiner Perkins, founder and CEO of Good Technology, and as a founder of Tugboat Ventures. But what sets him apart isn't just his resume. It's his willingness to step back, question the default path, and ask, what if there's a better way to lead? What if we could build companies that last 100 years? Because they're rooted in something deeper. In today's conversation, you'll hear Dave reflect on long-term thinking as a form of courage, on quiet grit as the foundation for resilience, and on the power of purpose. He reminds us leadership isn't about how fast you scale. It's about what you stand for and what you're willing to sustain. Let's take off. Well, Dave, it's great to have you here. And you have such an extraordinary career and have really been able to pull that together and synthesize that in such a meaningful way. I know we'll have only a brief time to get into each of the different aspects of it. But I wondered if you might start with us with your very, very early days when you were first at Hewlett Packard and how that inspired what would ultimately become this journey that has taken you to Silicon Valley and Sun Valley and many places in between.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it. So Hewlett Packard was almost by good fortune, because I needed to get a job. I wanted to go to a 4-year college. I think our family really wasn't in a position where they could pay for it. So I felt, got to find something. And so I did reach out to HP just looking for any kind of job. I would have been happy to be a gardener, work in the cafeteria, maintenance, whatever they would accept me for. And they got back fairly shortly and said, look, we have a program for emerging engineers. People excited about that as a field of practice and going to college. Would you be interested in that? And I was like, I would absolutely be interested. And I spent the next 4 summers working at Hewlett Packard at 3 different divisions. The work was mostly manufacturing work, showing up at 6 a.m. and working on the assembly line. But they did have a mentor engineer each summer. I get to spend a little bit of time with the general manager of each of the divisions. They had some kind of teaching and practices around that. And it was really a wonderful experience. But what it did, it actually caused me to believe all companies were really wonderful places to work. It was my first corporate work experience. I thought it was fantastic. I enjoyed it. The barbecues, the gyms, just the overall attitude, this idea of the HP way culture, which was so people-centric. But it created an indelible mark on me. And it's one I've never forgotten because I saw how they cared about people. And I saw how the people talked about the founders. And then later in my career, I think the first real exposure was at Bain & Company, which itself was a very good company. I was in the San Francisco office, but some of our clients were far from HP-like. And that's when I started realizing, wow, there's a real spectrum out there of companies. But that's kind of where I got started.
Yeah, and your story really does cover such change in how companies have been led, how they have grown, how leadership has evolved. And you're in the room of the founding teams and in the founding moments of a number of companies, drugstore.com, Google, Good Technology. But your time at Good Technology was different and defining for you. Can you talk about the challenges that you faced there, especially in the midst of a lot of personal challenges as well? I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with is making that work, that professional challenge and that professional contribution, while at the same time having real family concerns or personal concerns. And what happened there and how it was such a turning point for you?
Yeah, let me just step back to set some context, which
Sure.
is I went to Stanford Business School with the intention of coming out as an entrepreneur. And I wanted to start a company in the tech space. I'd already done one, kind of helped with a laser, kind of a startup laser company, industrial CO2 laser company. And so as I was coming out, John Doerr from Kleiner Perkins, who had already become famous in the venture circles for his investment in Netscape and ones prior, reached out and wanted to meet. And that led to an offer to join him for my summer between business school years at Kleiner Perkins. I ended up passing on that, working in Netscape instead, but still very much intended on starting a technology company coming out of Stanford Business School. John and I reconnected and he said, Dave, I really would like you to join this team for a couple of years. Then after a couple of years working here at Kleiner Perkins, you're going to learn how we build great companies, tech companies. I will serve on your board of directors. I will fund you. And you can build this wonderful next generation Hewlett Packard that you aspire to do. And so after 3 years, not 2 years at Kleiner, and that's where I did get exposed to the founding teams at Google and Amazon and AutoTrader and co-founded drugstore.com and got involved with Blue Nile, lots of other companies. It was my turn. And so I'm like, with John's support, I started Good Technology right when the market was crashing. Right when the dot-com crash was starting, the same week my son was born, and you're reading the book. My father also had a bizarre accident playing golf where somebody hit a golf ball and it struck him in the left eye and it kind of exploded the left side of his face and destroyed his eye. That was all the same week. I'm closing documents. My son's being born. My father's going through multiple rounds of surgery. And so that was the beginning of Good Technology. And it was get big fast, build something meaningful. I was incredibly ambitious to do this. John Doerr was incredibly ambitious to build something significant. We were saying, we need to build something of, 5, 10, $20 billion of value to really kind of realize both John and my potential in building something special. And so there was tremendous pressure around this as the markets were crashing. And we were trying to launch our first product, which was called the Sounds Good Player, which would plug into the handspring visor, if you remember that. And it was a MP3 player, a very high quality MP3 player, about the size of a matchbox. It was actually, the original design came from a guy named Jeff Mock, who had been in Apple. And we brought that to market. And as we're bringing that market, I was launching a second business idea within the company, and that was wireless messaging. And there's an emergent company called RIM with the BlackBerry service. It was a very rudimentary piece of software you put on your laptop or your desktop to redirect your emails out to your pager. Not secure, not timely, not guaranteed delivery, or confirmation delivery. And we decided to go after that space with a very high quality software team to build a fully syncing mobile device. And we ended up competing head to head with BlackBerry on this. And it was really interesting to be on the other side because I worked very long hours. There was incredible amounts of stress. You're building, you're raising capital, you're dealing with organizational challenges, you're trying to partner with major companies in the manufacturing, distribution. So there was a lot happening. And then, as I said earlier, in the backdrop of some of the, the personal dynamics I was dealing with. And so it was much easier to be on the investor side, put it that way.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, and as a result of that, and actually those personal challenges continued, right? Your mother also had a significant health challenge as well,
She did.
Which is, I think, something that a number of people I know in my generation now are balancing the children at home and also taking care of parents as well. And that's a hard thing to do in the midst of really pushing hard professionally. And you had talked about then at Good Technology, you likely would have probably gone in as CEO, but it was too much in the midst of all of that was happening. Is that right?
Yes, I was the founding CEO of the company and led the launch of that MP3 player, led the fundraising for the wireless messaging service. That was $60 million. And so we were well capitalized. We ended up raising another 100 million over the course of about, I think, next year and a half. But I came to the realization that one, this was a very complicated business to bring forward. There was an enterprise software component. There was a hardware device and software on that hardware device component. We had to connect into wireless carrier networks, which have all kinds of requirements around that. So it was multiple dimensions of kind of technical risk reduction in areas I didn't have direct experience in. And so I originally sought a person to help me as president. I would stay as CEO. I still believed in my vision. I believed in the capital I'd raised, the initial team I'd put together, and then through the conversations with this gentleman and the background of the stress that was going on in my personal life, it was kind of a moment I was encouraged by a few people, not all. John Doerr was not encouraging it. Bill Campbell was, of hiring a more experienced CEO to lead the firm. And that's what we did. And I became the chairman of the firm. But unfortunately, that relationship did not last as long as I had hoped. We kind of made it work for about a year and a half. And then it ultimately, it just took, we couldn't pull it off. So So I decided to leave to create space so that he could lead, and he successfully grew and sold the company for us, which I am grateful for.
Yes, yes. Well, and those are experiences that you have when you're playing in the world that you're playing in, right? And
Yes.
And challenging ones. I was really taken by because I work also in the space of stories as well as leadership, and really taken by what happened next, and that you had a recommendation. Your Good Technology co-founder recommended that you not read but listen to the Bill Moyer interviews of Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
And I'd love you to speak to that, because it's such an important thing, and I think it speaks to how we live in the world, how we work in the world, how story plays such a critical part in every single thing that we do. And I think you talk about this so well in your book.
Yeah. So this gentleman is Joel Jewett. He's one of my co-founders. He also knew the CEO that we had brought into the firm. I had a prior relationship with him too. So he was one of the very few people in the inner circle around the dynamics between myself and the CEO, and trying to be a kind of a positive force in that. But it was clear that I was struggling from the standpoint of, like, I was no longer leading the firm at the level I hoped to lead as the then chairman. I wasn't clear I was going to be ever returning to Kleiner Perkins, because at one point I was going to come back and be a partner there someday in the future. And so things were not playing out the way I had expected. And I was kind of wondered, could this be so bad that it actually affects my career here in Silicon Valley? And that's when Joel said, you know what, you really have to kind of get plugged into the ideas of Joseph Campbell. And that's where I said, yeah, I'll get a book and read it. And as you said, he said, no, don't read a book. You want to hear his voice, the inflections, the tone, the emphasis. It's really important. So I got at the time, I think they were CDs, and I think it was 5 or 6 of them, I think 5. And then I just started listening to these during my commutes, later at night, and I loved it. I loved the storytelling, because what Joseph Campbell was doing, he spent his entire life doing this, was studying mythology of all the great civilizations that have ever existed and finding common themes in those stories and experiences. And one of the most common story was the hero's journey. And this idea that you, as a young man or woman, you should kind of bear the load of society, do what you're expected to do, be what he calls effectively a good camel. And then at some point, if you've done that really well, you'll have the strength to make a transition. That transition will be to a lion. And then as a lion, you will then kill the dragon that stands in front of you, that scales are covered with the words, thou shalt. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that. And then after you kill that dragon, you're free to move within your own circle. And it's almost like being reborn as a child with no obligations, but as a mature adult. And that part tied in with the hero's journey itself, which is kind of going off into the wilderness, rediscovering, being challenged into something greater, leaving comfort of your home, ended up being a story that really resonated with me. Now, we're all familiar with it in the Star Wars series. George Lucas adopted this, but I took inspiration from that, because I kept thinking, maybe this is the beginning of something. Maybe this is the beginning of a new exploration, and not suddenly, but this is kind of what began my more objectively looking at the world of business and trying first within the venture world and then later outside the venture world to really understand how we could build great, lasting companies with wonderful values, deep purpose, take care of their people, much as I had experienced in that early Hewlett Packard experience.
Yes. Yes. I love that. I think that's so important. And the idea of bringing that concept of story and those ancient mythological ideas into how we understand how we are in the world really has incredible power and resonance.
It does. And
Yeah.
it's universal and it's been forever,
And it's
and
been
so
forever.
it's very much part of the human experience.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, you started out before you got to the developing the Tugboat Institute. You started with Tugboat Ventures. And I know, again, you've had such a rich career that we're just skimming the surface of all of this. But and you used your own life cycle methodology. I wonder if you could speak a bit to what it was that you were hoping to accomplish with Tugboat Ventures, and also the name Tugboat.
Yeah, yeah. So let me hit the name first. So Trey Vassallo was one of my co-founders, and we were sitting at a Starbucks across from the Dutch Goose in Menlo Park for the people that know that area. And I was brainstorming with her, like, I would come up with a name for what I'm trying to do in the world. And I want it to be kind of a metaphor for it. And we talked about, Peloton, we talked about Sherpa, kind of the spirit of this. And then for some reason, just hit me in the, just struck me like tugboats. They're incredibly capable pilots because they take aircraft carriers, cargo, oil tankers through narrow passages. They get them safely into port. They safely get them out of port. But you don't know the name of a single tugboat captain. You don't know the name of a single tugboat. Yet there are thousands of them out there just doing their jobs extremely well. And if there's a mistake made, like when that one boat hit the bay on one of the piers, I think on the Bay Bridge, in San Francisco, like everybody hears about it because it's so rare because they do their work so well. So it kind of felt right to me. It's small, powerful, experienced, but not what's important. What's important is the ship, the thing that it's trying to help. And it frankly even fits better today what it did for Tugboat Ventures. So my idea with Tugboat Ventures is to kind of return to some of the early roots of venture capital, where you try to build businesses with a lot less capital, get to profitability early, grow from that profitability, still ambitious, still want to build something of significance, but not in this kind of raising lots of money over and over again, because I'd seen the negative effects of that. The companies were being geared to raise capital, not generate cash. So raise cash, not generate cash. And I thought there was something to it. So I was looking for entrepreneurs with a similar mindset. And what I learned, I'm very happy with many of the entrepreneurs I got to work with. It was a good experience, but you're still playing the venture capital game. You still have to get an exit. You still have to go public or be sold. You still have to be able to raise additional rounds of financing, even if you're more capital efficient. And there's expectations around that. And all those expectations in the period I was actively leading Tugboat Ventures and making new investments was around growth, just
Right.
extremely high growth rates. And
Right. And you'd seen that shift, hadn't you, in how things were being done in the market?
Yeah, that shift started when I was at Kleiner Perkins, and I think very much pioneered by the partner I worked for, John Doerr. It was something I experienced at Good Technology. And it was something that I had experienced at TPG very successfully with a couple of investments I made there, including Success Factors. But I was looking for kind of like a middle ground. And what I figured out over time is there isn't really a middle ground. You kind of have to be all in on the model if it's going to work. And so that's kind of what caused me, when it was time to raise a third fund, to say, here's a window of opportunity to kind of decide, is this how I want to spend the next 12 to 15 years of my life? Because every time you raise a fund, you're signing up for another extended period of time. And because one of my primary LPs, the lead partner, had left the firm, he had retired, and I had a new crew, and they were asking some questions, which were good questions. It kind of gave me permission to say, maybe I need to think about this too, as they're thinking about it. Does it make sense to have a third Tugboat Ventures fund? And I don't know, I don't think I surprised them. Maybe I did, but I said, look, I'm going to take some time and go do some exploration. Then I'll decide whether I'm going to go forward with it or not. And that's what kind of led to this uncovering of what I call evergreen companies, and the slow discovery of them.
I think that's so powerful, but it's also very difficult. And maybe before we go more into this evergreen companies, which is really a critically important concept that I'm so grateful that you're bringing more visibility around in the market and in our culture. But is going against the flow, right? Going against the flow of the grow big, grow fast. That's a hard thing to do when you are coming from that world.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you have to, more than I even understood, I had to uh, kind of rewire how I thought. I had to throw away things and realize that, no, it's not true that you can only become a big company today if you raise a lot of venture capital or outside capital. And so there's things that I had or you can't recruit great people if you don't offer them stock options with the opportunity to sell the company and get rich on that. I mean, these were things that I just got kind of wired in my brain, a number of things. And so there was this kind of learning journey I went on to see if I could overcome, those almost rules of business, which I had just taken at face value. I didn't even question, like rules of thumb, like that's just the way you do it.
Yeah. Once you come to this realization for yourself, you're going against the grain. You're going against the sort of the big swell, the tide, the way that things are growing so rapidly, being financed in a particular way. To get others to come along with you on that journey is a very different thing and can be a very difficult thing, I can imagine.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question because I didn't really bring people along. That was very hard. I tried to. And I tried different experiments with, people who were founding companies, people who maybe hadn't raised outside capital yet, and tried to say, hey, look, here's this idea of an evergreen company. It's got these 7 evergreen P principles. What do you think? And so in a sense, I was trying to convert them. And what I found that doesn't work well, at least it didn't work well at the time. What worked is I would talk about these ideals and people would say, that's how I run my company today, Dave. That is very aligned, or that's very aligned with what I plan to build. And suddenly what I was offering to them was, you mean there's other people that think the same way I do? I'm like, absolutely, there's other people. I like to meet those people. And that's what led to the formation of Tugboat Institute as a place to gather and share best practices among these people who largely felt like lone eagles, that they were doing something very important. They're doing very consistent with their sense of purpose and the impact they wanted to have in the world, but did not comport with the idea of raising a lot of venture capital on a path to being sold or taken public. They just didn't see that as the way they wanted to go. They didn't want to lose control. They didn't want to be told that ultimately, the outcome of this company is a high valued exit. They're like, that's not what I'm looking for. So interesting enough, a lot of these people I met, I later discovered were actually introverts versus extroverts. And I think part of that is because I think introverts, because they're so reflective, often have a very strong internal compass about what they are trying to achieve. They know their North Star. They're not looking for external validation. They don't need to walk in a room and get a round of applause. They don't need to stand on stage. Now, to be clear, they can be very effective communicators, very effective presenters. Has nothing to do with that. But where they get their energy from is time spent by themselves, them knowing that they're on the right path, that they're doing what they think is right, not necessarily what society is telling them right. So I kind of found a natural audience in both people who were already running their companies aligned with these principles, as well as people who are kind of more introverted than extroverted and kind of their disposition.
That's very interesting, actually. I think that says a lot about the importance of reflection and whether one is introverted or extroverted, ensuring that you take that time. And again, I don't know why I don't want to spend too much time here, but it is a significant thing to be purpose focused and values based in this culture and this society, which wants to say there are no values. It's all relative. It doesn't matter. How do you continue forward in the midst of pretty huge cultural swells that are not any longer connected to values at all?
Yeah, I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for the people I've gotten to know they're kind of leading these evergreen companies, and they're very clear about their purpose. And their purpose is not to generate wealth for themselves. It may be a byproduct of building a successful company that serves customers well, treats employees well. And that's fine. In fact, we should celebrate that. But that is not why they're doing it. And that shift alone is really important, because if the purpose of what you're creating and you're bringing all these people together and they're dedicating their lives and their energy is ultimately so you can sell it and enrich a small number of people, that feels very different than somebody says, look, I'm trying to build something with you that's going to last for generations. That's going to serve our customers well beyond my lifetime, well beyond your lifetime. They're going to serve future employees well beyond both of our lifetimes. So let's build a strong foundation towards that. and make sure that we are strong in environments, like you said, with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of chaos, a lot of changing things. And so that gets kind of wired into how they think. It's how they structure themselves. They usually have very strong balance sheets, for example, and to bring this to life, you don't see these kind of companies borrowing much money. And there's just legendary stories. Like I was talking to one company that's out of St. Louis, the Stupp Brothers, and the company was founded during the Civil War. And then there was kind of a Great Depression in the late 1980s or 1880s. And, the family still is very close to that story because they lost the business. They lost it to the bank because they had borrowed too much money. And so the family basically said, that's not what we're going to do going forward. And so they either have had very little debt or very modest debt because they've learned through the shared experience of generations of their family. That's one of the great ways to lose your company is borrow too much money. Now look at our world today. I mean, whether it be private equity owned or just encouraged by investment bankers, companies have way too much leverage on them, and variable, not fixed in many cases. And then you go into a high interest rate environment, you can flip these companies over. You don't even have that noise inside evergreen companies. They're structured in such a way for, to deliver against their purpose for a long time. And a part of that is, having a very strong balance sheet, having strong culture. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's wonderful. And so you did mention it earlier. You said you were starting to identify these companies, and I know this started to accelerate as, the more after you buy a Subaru, you start to see a lot of Subarus. But I think, but you made your own purpose was being defined, and you start to connect them with these other companies and but they are maybe operating a bit as, I think your term was lone eagles, and sometimes it is lonely because it's not the norm. And then you realized there was going to be power in bringing them together. Talk a bit about that. I think that's a beautiful part of how this has evolved.
Yeah, I mean, and this was, I was going out to learn from them initially, and this was literally by word of mouth. So I'd ask somebody a pretty basic question, which is, who do you know that you admire who's going to build a meaningful company but has no interest in raising venture capital or private equity and has no desire to go public or be sold? And most people said to me, because the largest network I have is out of Silicon Valley, like, what are you talking about? It'd literally be like, what are you talking about? Why would I know anybody like that? I mean, that doesn't even sound possible. And then occasionally people would say, oh, you've got to meet a guy. He's local. He's a Stanford Business School graduate. His name's Mac Harmon. And he runs Balsam Hills. And they're building artificial Christmas trees, beautiful ones, Christmas trees. And I think he's that kind of guy. And it just, Robert Passon at Radio Flyer, Lisa Ingram at White Castle. I mean, some of these came much later, but that was the process. Introductions. I'd go have coffee, lunch, dinner, whatever time they would spend with me, and just talk about their businesses. But through those conversations, you're listening, right? And I'm like, how can I be helpful? Because I like these people. I like what they're doing. I admire this. This feels like kind of really the heirs to the Hewlett Packard values more than I'm seeing walking up and down Sand Hill Road, those folks. And what I heard is, as you said, I don't know many people thinking this way. Are you talking to others like me? I'm like, I sure am. And they're good people. And they'd be like, will you make an introduction? So I started making introductions. And then I realized, wait a second, why don't I see if I can bring 30 or 40 of these people together? And if there's any value in having us all together for a few days. And that's when we held the first Tugboat Summit in October 2013 in Sun Valley, Idaho, where I'd recently relocated my family. And it was magical to get people of this level of purpose and values and humility in a room, sharing ideas from the stage, sharing them on hikes, over dinner. I just realized this is something I've never seen before. I've never seen CEOs be this candid with each other about what's working and what's not working. I mean, I'm used to going into CEO meetings where everybody's got the armor on, everything's up and to the right, things are great. Even people who, putting myself back in like TPG and Kleiner days, I know they're from struggling. But I hear them describing their firm to the other CEOs, and it's not what the truth is, because you can't do that. I mean, you got to kind of fake it till you make it, even if you're failing it, right? And that is not what I experienced with these people. And the truth is, none of them had outside investors, so they weren't worried about like anybody figuring out that they shouldn't be in the job. It's their companies, And I think what they're really after is like, what can I learn from you? What can I learn from you, and what can you learn from me? So we help advance each other in trying to build these kind of wonderful evergreen companies. And so that's when I committed myself. We'd been together for less than 24 hours. I'm like, it's now clear as day to me. This is how I need to spend the rest of my life. I got to find a way to build this community, unlock all this wisdom they have within this community, and then over time share that with the broader business community, with the permission of the people who kind of, shared these best practices. And that's what we've been doing.
That's wonderful. And you've come up with 7 Ps, the 7 Ps that are reflected in all of these businesses that are a part of the Tugboat Institute. Can you speak to those and how that developed? I know that's a long story, so maybe we'll get the short version. But
yeah. So Chris Alden, who helped me get this off the ground, he was one of the founders of the Red Herring magazine. If you remember that magazine, I'd come up with the idea of evergreen companies. I started calling them that, and the people I was meeting with, this is before that first gathering. Oh, I like that. I like what that evokes. That idea of an evergreen company through all seasons, growing, lasting for hundreds of years. But Dave, we need to put a little bit more of a framework around this. One, because it'll help guide the evergreen companies that we're going to be working with, and two, is so that we define what it means to be an evergreen company, not somebody else, and then we lose control of its definition, which we've seen happen in the past with other types of companies and categories. And so he spent a little time on it. I spent a lot of time on it. And I kind of came up with a straw man, a term we used to use at Bain & Company. I said, I think this is the 7. This is kind of the summation of what I think I've heard from all these interviews, from every book I've read, including all the Jim Collins book, Drucker books, Tom Peters books, my own personal experience. And I just said, here's what I think I hear you saying. I think this is what would really represent the core principles that would give you the highest probability of building a company that's going to be around for another 100 years. And it's purpose, perseverance, people first, private, profit, paced growth, and pragmatic innovation. And the idea that those 7 work as a system. And if that system is working well, then I can't guarantee you'll be around for 100 years, but you'll have a much higher probability of thriving and growing for the next 100 years. And so we put it out there, and I said, look, I think this is a good start. Poke holes in it. Should we drop a P, add a P? And what's happened, it's been 13 years since then, and it just continues to get reinforced that most people believe, at least everybody involved with us, say that's a really good articulation of at its core what we're trying to achieve as an evergreen company. And validated by big companies and small companies. I mean, it's amazing to talk to a company that's 300 years old, Hollingsworth and Bose, and for Val Hollingsworth, notice the name, G9, saying that is how we have operated this company since we served Ben Franklin. These 7 Ps are a very good articulation. It's David Weekley of David Weekley Homes calling me up saying, Dave Wharton, I want to talk to you about this. I read an article, tell me more about these 7 Ps, because this is how I think about my business. I've never seen a framework quite like this. This is a really nice articulation of what I've been doing for years. And so going back to the earlier comment, we're not trying to get people to switch. We're not trying to bring them along. What we're trying to do is just identify people, say, this is how we operate. And I think in our society alone, there's tens of thousands of companies that are hidden evergreen companies. They don't know it because they haven't heard of an evergreen company before. But when they hear about this and they hear about the 7 Ps, they're going to go, oh, that's a very good framework for how we've been trying to build this business, and we'll continue building this business. And of course, they would love to have more ideas and best practices and insights against those, which we do try to offer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I really enjoyed you writing about your relationship with Jessica Herron at Stella and Dot. And it seems like that was pivotal for you in this development of this thought process and what ultimately led to Tugboat. Could you talk a bit about that and what she's done and how that inspired you?
Yeah, so Jessica was somebody that I had met when she was at Stanford Business School and was able to convince her to take funding from Kleiner Perkins to build her first company, Della and James. And that was one we were very excited about in the wedding planning space. Martha Stewart joined the board of directors. We raised $25 million on our way. And then dot-com crash happened. Company was sold a couple of times. I think one of them was the Knot. And Jessica stuck with it through it because she had a vision for what she wanted to build. And suddenly I came to the conclusion, I just can't achieve what I'm trying to achieve within this company at this point. So she started her own company, and she came to me and she said, look, I'm kind of starting over. I really liked you and your partners at Kleiner Perkins, but I've come to believe I don't like your model. In fact, I hate your model. And I was still very much steeped deep into the idea of kind of the way we built companies in Silicon Valley. And so she's kind of described what she was trying to do. I said, oh, you're trying to build a lifestyle business. oh my gosh, she could have ripped my face off. She's like, no, Dave, I'm not building a lifestyle business. I am building something that will be more impactful, a larger scale than what you back need Klein or Perkins to do. This is going to be meaningful, and I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And my exit strategy, be rolled out on a gurney with an oxygen tank. That's my exit strategy, not to sell, not to go public. This did not click for me at the time, Shannon. It didn't. I say it was kind of the seed that was planted that didn't germinate. But it was a very important conversation because I ended up giving her a little bit of personal money. A couple of the Kleiner partners who left the firm gave her some money. And then she built that over time pretty quickly, actually, to over 100 million in revenues and very successful, used very little. I think she ended up using less than $1 million to get profitable. And so she's kind of showing me the roadmap. Now, is it an exemplar of building an evergreen company? No, but her instincts were towards that. And in that, she helped me understand. And so when I was on my learning journey, instead of immediately kicking into fundraising for a third fund, she was the first person I met with. And I said, Jessica, let's go back. There's a lot of wisdom in what you shared with me that I think I overlooked, because now I'm looking for something I think more along the lines of what you have been trying to build, which is basically rejecting the Silicon Valley model and trying to do a different model, one that's almost completely self-funded. And so she kind of helped me understand what she did and how she did it. And I'm like, okay, that is the direction I think I need to head in. I'm going to try to find these heirs to Hewlett and Packard, who at this point I had not identified. And so that was kind of the beginning of. And then Jessica came and presented at our very first summit and kind of talked about her story. Mike Lohner, who was our chairman, kind of also chimed in on how he had helped support her. And so it was one of the case studies we did at our first gathering around how you bootstrap a company or near bootstrap a company into something evergreen-like.
If you've been asking yourself, what's the point of all of this? Not just in your job, but in your life, you're not alone. Most high achievers I work with aren't lacking drive. They're lacking direction that actually matters. That's why I built Leading with Purpose at the Grit Institute. It's a step-by-step path to reconnect with what drives you, leads you, and sustains you, especially when things get hard. If you're tired of just checking boxes and you're ready to lead with intention, go to thegritinstitute.com/purpose/ and start Leading with Purpose today.
That's fantastic. That's great. Well, I think it's important as well that we have these relationships that are meaningful and that continue to support our own development. And hopefully we also continue to support theirs. And there's a real richness to that, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah, it was really a pleasure. And, I did not spend a lot of time with her because at the time I made that personal investment, I was starting Tugboat Ventures. In fact, I did try to get her to take money from Tugboat Ventures or TPG, where I had left from. And she's like, no, you don't understand that. That is exactly what I'm trying to avoid. So a little bit of personal money is one thing. Institutional money is another. But no, she is a very pioneering woman. And I'm very, very grateful for her for kind of planting that seed and helping open my eyes to this whole other category, which I don't think she knew of either at the time. I think she was just like, she was a little bit in the fog too, but she's like, I'm not doing that. So I'm going to do something different. And I want to do something that's meaningful, which again, not a lifestyle business.
Yes, not a lifestyle business. No, that's great. You also write about, and I love this, In-N-Out Burger. And I had a chance to speak for them actually several different times as a keynote speaker on grit and resilience. And I, as part of that experience, they required that I go to have dinner with them, of course, and go to kind of in the back of the restaurant and see how they ran things. And I was absolutely blown away. I mean, absolutely floored by how it is they take care of and develop people in particular, how it is that they are absolutely consistent on their quality of delivery, and they're very careful about how they grow. I mean, so much so that I have actually joked about our family moving down to Oregon or something for a summer so our kids could work there. The experience would be remarkable. But, but really the longevity of their employees is like often 15, 20 or more years. It's just extraordinary. So I love that they're one of your group, your cohorts.
Yeah. They're not in our group. Lindsay is not. She's a very private person, as you probably know, and kind of fell into ownership in the company under pretty tough circumstances. I think it was her father passed away in that flight, that plane crash. But I admired her from afar. I read a really good book by Stacy Perlman about this. I think it's Perlman. She did a wonderful job. And it was early in my learning journey. And I'm like, this is a great example of a wonderful evergreen company. And what really stuck with me was pace growth. People first for sure, product quality exceptional. But here's McDonald's, which started after them. I believe Kentucky Fried Chicken started after them. And they're adding hundreds of stores. They're franchising. They're, getting to thousands and thousands of units. And In-N-Out was like at the time, like 8 or 9. And, and the founders, they were just like, no, we're going to build this at a pace that we're comfortable with. So when we have somebody in our team who's developed to the level of being a good manager, they'll open a new store and give them the chance to manage that. And so they completely rejected what the world was telling them they should do. And they still do today. I mean, she's got that same attitude, which is we're going to do it the way we want to do it because that's who we are. And so that was a really important example for me early of this idea of longevity, pace growth, ignoring what everybody else is telling you should be doing. I mean, Wegmans is similar to this, very successful grocer on the East Coast. And, I had some time with Colleen Wegman, who's now the CEO, spent some time with her. And I was kind of pushing her on, why aren't you adding more stores? I mean, there's so much demand. People love your grocery stores. And, there's cities and states all over the Northeast and South, probably going to the Midwest, and I'm sure the West too, would love to have a Wegmans. And she said, that's just not the way we do it. We open a couple a year. It's a very deliberate process. The family's very involved in this. And I kind of said, well, wait a second. I understand opening a couple when you have like 20 stores. And then you're 50 stores, you're still opening just a couple. Then 100. I said, your growth rate's actually slowing on a percentage basis every year unless you kick it up. And she's like, Dave, that's just what we do. And I love that because their family owns the business so they can do as they wish because the owners are giving them permission to build this incredibly high quality company at a pace they feel comfortable with it that I don't think they're ever going to go away. I mean, they're never going to get way over their skis like so many of these other retailers have in trying to expand really fast to satisfy their investors, to get the thing public or sold. They're not playing that game. Playing a very different game. That's a purpose-driven game. That's a people-first game. That's a product quality game. That's being a deeply important part of your local community game. Those are good games to play.
Those are good games. Those are the best games. Well, I want to go into your 9 rules of innovation as well, but maybe we can touch on the 9 rules of innovation, and then I want to come back to the purpose and the people, which I know are 2 of the 7 Ps that are just so critical. But let's start with the 9 rules of innovation for your evergreen companies.
Yeah. So this is really, so I learned the innovation playbook of Get Big Fast. And this is writing, assembling teams very fast, core technical team, raise a bunch of money, put in a complete management team. The management team then fills out below, you're loading these products with features, you're going after large markets. These rules of innovation are about doing something that's much more paced. It's about doing something where you're being very deliberate about removing risk early. And funny enough, it's like the original venture capital playbook when venture capitalists had access to very little money. So they had to encourage the entrepreneurs to get really clear about what are the risks in this business idea and how do we remove those risks with our early time and energy and our very limited capital. And if we can remove some of those risks, let's give you some more money. And then if you can remove some more risk, some additional money. So it was a very deliberate process, a very creative process. You had to be thoughtful not only about the product design, but the design of your business model, because you wanted to be one that didn't require too much capital because there wasn't capital there. Those lessons are very much the lessons of evergreen companies, that they're very deliberate about risk identification and reduction. They will comfortably go after a smaller market to establish themselves to go then after a larger market. I mean, one of the great things that was lost in the model of innovation, and Clayton Christensen talks about this a lot, is if you're going to build something that's a market creating innovation, really creating a new market, you have to have a tremendous amount of patience. And you also have to be very focused on early profitability, because what you want to do is you want to buy yourself time to let the technology mature and the market mature towards you. And that can take over 10 years. It can take 15 years. But if your purpose is to redefine a market You don't mind spending a big chunk of your life doing that. And so what broke was core part of this is take that emergent technology into a niche market where there's high value for an underserved or non-served customer. Venture capitalist, if you walked in there today with their $1 billion funds and said, hey, look, I'm got this cool technology. I'm going to go after a little $50-100 million market. They would laugh you out of the office and say, I can't back you because we have to go after big ideas, huge markets. I mean, that's how we build something that's really valuable because they're taking a shorter time frame and they're trying to get to very fast growth against it. So what Clayton told me before he passed was, I think VCs really lost an important component of what made it great in the early days. And that is this impatience for profit, patience for growth. It's the exact opposite now. There's impatience for growth, incredible patience for profit, if they ever come. He said, but the original model is one that had worked very well to establish, again, in a foothold market, the initial technology, the technology gets better, the market matures, and then go upstream from there. VCs, almost by design, skip that step today, with very, very few exceptions. And so, so those are some of the kind of the ideas around innovation. There's other ones like, planting many seeds, digging many holes, bullets before cannonballs. All three of those ideas are very similar. That's Jim Goodnight, Jim Collins, and Robert Passon. And that's a form of risk reduction, which is, what can you do? A prototype, slide presentation, something to kind of get customer reaction to an idea or a product, then start investing in it if you start seeing some success there. So that'd be another one, for example. And so
that's great. And you list those, of course, in your book, which I'm hoping everybody will read.
Yeah,
a whole chapter. Exactly. That's great. Well, circling back to the idea of purpose, I think one of the things that is interesting to connect, and I'm very interested in the fact that a lot of these companies are led by introverts that you've identified, because there's a reflective component there that I think a lot of leaders don't give themselves time for anymore. And maybe they used to, maybe they didn't, but certainly in the pace of today, there seems to be less of that. I'm wondering about one's development of a sense of personal purpose and how that personal purpose then connects into what it is that you're doing professionally. Maybe how that's played out in your own life and how it is that you've seen that play out in one or two of your company's life.
Yeah, you covered two things there, and I'll try to separate the two of them. So this time for reflection. How do you have time for reflection if you're expected to grow 50 to 75% a year, 100% a year? Because in most businesses, that is headcount. If you're growing by 50%, you're growing your headcount by, that's a lot of recruiting. That's a lot of onboarding. It's a lot of training, organizing. If you're growing 100% a year, 50 employees, 100 employees, 200 employees, 400 employees, 800 employees. I mean, it is very difficult to train and develop those people against the objectives you have. So where's the time even for yourself? There's not much. What if you were growing at 15% a year after year? There's time for you to grow and reflect and develop yourself. There's time for your team to do that. I think for many founders, this creates space for them to get better and learn and develop. So the growth rate itself has a huge impact on the capacity of the leadership team to have room for reflection and learning, as well as, their own development. And so I think that's one of the huge advantages of evergreen companies is that if you're going to grow 15, 20, 25% over a 30-year period, you will build a massive, important company, but you'll have given yourself and your team time to develop and grow. And there's going to be some churn too. You're going to have some key managers that, now they're no longer the right person for that leadership role. So you can bring new people in, but you don't immediately throw them on a treadmill that's going 100 miles an hour. So they can become part of the culture and how they integrate themselves. So that's a really important point of this. And then to your second around kind of professional, let's say business purpose, individual purpose, it's really important. There's deep alignment there. And what might surprise you is some of I think the most forward-thinking evergreen companies on this actually measure people's personal purpose as part of the onboarding and recruiting process. So they want to know. Well, they want to know what impact you want to have in the world. And many people haven't really thought about this. And they go through the exercise. In fact, there's one company in the Midwest, after they talk about it in the recruiting process, then you join, and then they put you through a purpose exercise for 2 weeks. And it's not the purpose of the company, it's your purpose. And at the end of that, if it is determined by you, this is you, that you're not aligned enough with the company's purpose, they will encourage you to go find an opportunity that's more aligned with your personal purpose. Because in their view, this is what's more important. Having people find where, because work is such a huge part of our lives, where that work is very much aligned with their sense of purpose. And then for the people who stay, these people stay for a very long time because they're like, wow, what we are doing is so aligned with what's meaningful to me. I want to be part of this company for the long haul. I want to further develop myself. I want to further help develop the company. And so, yeah, I think very high alignment of personal and professional at all levels of organization is a wonderful thing.
It's interesting. During and after the pandemic, McKinsey did a couple of studies of the workforce, and I think it's utterly fascinating that it was not the organizational purpose that was missing that caused the disruption in the workforce. It was the lack of connection to personal purpose, and so that's one of the things that I teach at the Leadership and Strategic Impact course at Tuck a couple times a year. But is really going into our personal purposes, because if you haven't done that work, you can't figure out what that alignment can possibly be. You don't have that anchor.
And here's something that's subtle, but I think it's important. You can understand your personal purpose. You can understand what you think the company purpose is, and that may be aligned. But what if the company's real purpose is not the stated purpose? Then how can you get alignment? And I think that's one of the things that's very hard on employees is they're like, wait, I thought I was at a company that this is what its purpose was. But what I've learned is the purpose of this company is to get the highest valuation possible for the founders and the investors. So while on the website it said this, we talked about it. When push came to shove, when we got towards the end of the investment period for the funds that were invested in that, we started changing behaviors and we started polishing up the company to try to get a high valued exit, which was incongruent with our purpose. I'm not even sure employees understand it completely, but I think there's a gut instinct that, like, I've been operating and working and dedicating myself to this company, and it wasn't actually for the purpose I thought it was. It was a financial purpose. And so, again, I say this is subtle, but I think that's one of the issues. If every venture capital backed and private equity owned company said, our purpose is to maximize the exit value of our investors, it'd be honest, because that's what it is. But that's not what they say. They want people they're trying to tap into the energy of employees around what I call a false purpose, not an authentic purpose. The authentic purpose is around wealth generation for the investors and founders and the executive team. The written one might be one that feels heartfelt again, this is when I want to, I really think it's important to kind of increase people's objective understanding of this is like, what is my company's real purpose? And I can tell you in an Evergreen company, when they say this is our purpose, that purpose is tightly held by the owners and the executive team. There is alignment between that and Evergreen companies, and there's not a hidden one. It is what it is. Because otherwise they could go the other path and probably generate a lot more personal wealth by just selling or going public. And they won't, because that's not the purpose of the company. So does that make sense, Shannon?
Do you think it's possible in the old model of funding or not possible? I mean, I guess it's
well, when push comes to shove,
possible, can it?
When push comes to shove, do you think a venture capital firm is going to, for example, hand over all their stock and say, you know what? I think it's better for this company to stay private against this really important purpose, and we'll just forego any returns on it. They might do that in a failing company just to clear out, but in the ones that are succeeding, no. And then think about public companies too. I mean, Milton Friedman talks about it and people attack him for it, but it's true. It's like at the end of the day, to maximize profits, thus shareholder returns, is the purpose of a public company. And frankly, there's a good logic to that, because if you've got 20, 30, 40,000 investors, how can you know what purpose all of those owners want for you? The only thing they share in common is increase the value of this stock for us. And then we can take the proceeds of that and do purposeful things with it, charitable, philanthropic, whatever, but don't do that inside the company, because you may not even be doing things I care about. Right. And so I think companies can claim, public companies, that they've got a deep purpose, and it's a directional thing. But again, they missed their quarterly earnings, like Salesforce.com did last year. Mark Benioff talked about family. Ohana for a very long time. But when I think it was Elliott Management went in there and started buying up shares and saying, look, we want to see some profit discipline here. What did Mark do? He took care of it. Let go of a lot of employees, even though he had a record year of profitability and a massive cash balance. There was no financial reason to do what he did against what his prior stated purpose was outside of proving to the capital markets he was a serious businessman committed to efficiency. That's not what he said his purpose was. That's what he knelt to. And that was heartbreaking for me, to be honest with you, because I thought he was one of the ones like, okay, he's different.
Well, it's hard to dispute that ultimately is what the goal is, right? For a public company. And explains a lot about why private is one of your 7Ps as well.
That's why I've had private companies or public companies approach me and say, I think we're Evergreen and we would like to be certified because we certify companies as Evergreen. I'm like, we can't. I mean, private. And like, well, but we're pseudo private. We act kind of like a private. We have a fairly large family ownership. I said, I understand that, but still, your external shareholders are ultimately going to drive the agenda when the stuff hits the fan. And that's just the way it's going to be. I promise you, you will react to that and trying to satisfy their expectations, then focus on your purpose and how you're treating the team. And yes, you'll be less reactive, but you can't ignore that. And a wonderful, let's say, for example, family-owned evergreen company that's multi-generational, you can have a horrible quarter. You have a couple of horrible quarters. And it may be, we understand why this happened. There will be no change in employment. We'll continue to invest in what we're doing. We'll get through this together. I mean, we've been around for 100 years. We're going to be around for another 100 years. We're just not going to act in a knee-jerk way. They can do things that, that they're so even-keeled that, I think any public CEO would be like, oh, I wish I worked for one of those.
Right.
And I think at one point, there was a survey that said 84% of all public CEOs wish they were running private companies, not public companies. That tells you a lot. There was a Ford survey 5 or 6 years ago.
How do you hope that the work, because you're doing this really important work and elevating values, elevating character, elevating those things that really matter. How do you hope and how do you plan for perhaps that to change business as a whole?
Well, I hope. I love the idea of exposing people to ideas and then they respond to those ideas. So I think there's, as I said earlier, a very large number of Evergreen-like companies that just haven't heard of us or heard of Evergreen before, the 7Ps. I think these ideas will be of service to them. And they'll say, oh, I got it. We live to those 7P values already. And this just helps us further it. I really hope this inspires the next generation of entrepreneurs and founders. So instead of just saying, look, the de facto growth model, as I did with Jessica, which was not right, is to go raise money and to raise a lot of money and try to build something significant in a short amount of time. And the trade-off there is you have to sell it or go public, but, that's the way it works. To see this and say, I have a purpose in mind that I could dedicate the rest of my life to. Happily the next 30, 40, 50 years and have this thing survive beyond my lifetime. And so I'm going to go, by definition, slower. I am going to be smarter, more creative. I'm going to build a really interesting business model. I'm going to serve customers at a very high level. I'm going to make sure my employees are treated really well. They're really engaged, they're creative, they're adapting, and we're going to build something that really matters. And I'm not going to worry about external validation. I'm not going to worry about the fact that, I've been at it for 10 years. I'm only at $5 million because Five's going to go to 500 over the next 30 years. But it took me a while to get this dialed in, and that's okay because I didn't have the pressure of outside investors. So I'm hoping there'll be a whole class go, I didn't realize that was available to us today. I think I'm going to do that. I also think it's a wonderful path for people who have had trouble raising venture capital as a class historically. These are minorities, these are women and others. Forget it. You don't have to. There is an alternative. Again, be impatient for profits, patient for growth, build a wonderful evergreen company, dedicate decades to doing this. You're doing it in a more paced way, so it's not as manic as it would be if you're venture backed. But wouldn't it be super cool if there was a whole bunch of next generation billionaires coming out of the minorities, from women who largely have not historically gotten venture capital? I'm like, this was actually a better way of building business in the first place. My family still owns all of this company. We're still deeply purpose driven. We've got great values. I think that would be very powerful and great examples for future generations to see anybody can do this. Anybody can build a wonderful evergreen company. There are no gatekeepers to building an evergreen company. The only gatekeepers are happy customers and happy employees. And as Andy Taylor says in Enterprise, if you have those two things, the profits will follow and you're fine. So, forget letting the gatekeepers decide whether you go forward or not. Go ahead and build your own evergreen.
That's excellent. What's the advice that you would give yourself coming out of college, knowing what you know now?
Well, I don't regret anything I did. I loved the experiences I had because in having those experiences, it shapes my conviction around evergreen companies. I wish I'd discovered this earlier. That's the only thing. I'm in my late 50s. If there'd been some way I could have accelerated all of this and figured this out maybe in my late 30s, that would be really good. Because I love this work. I love the people that are leading these evergreen companies. I think there's so much for us to do together to kind of advance society as we advance each of these individual companies. I just wish there was more time on the clock, but I'll just keep with our own version of paced growth, just keep going away at it.
And what does success mean to you today?
For me, it's really achieving measurable progress against the two parts of the vision I had for Tugboat Institute since the beginning. And the first part is to serve directly the members of Tugboat Institute in a way that really unlocks their trust and authenticity, humility, their ideas, their practices, business, family, self. And secondly, and this is what we're really doing with the book, is share this generously, these ideas, this inspiration, not lock this up and just have it be the secret of our 300 members, but like with their permission, we're sharing these ideas broadly. Whether you want to sign up for we have the Evergreen Journal Plus, which is a subscription product, gives you access to over 500 videos and articles about building great evergreen companies. We have a product now you can go in, spend about an hour putting in your company information, and it's called the Evergreen Growth Navigator. It tells you kind of how well you're doing relatively on the 7 Ps, gives you 30 or 40 ideas on how to mature further on each of all of those 7 Ps, as well as customized recommendations. So we're just hoping to empower people, even if we can't touch them and have them in membership, and we will continue growing membership too. But we've got people out of Guatemala now that are actually practicing evergreen practices. We have this out of Mexico, Canada, Italy. That's expanding. And I hope, people in any country around the world can kind of get inspired by the ideas too. Because again, anybody can build an evergreen company. You don't need outside capital to do this, but you do need some creativity. You do need, again, to be impatient for profits, patient for growth. Find some customers you can serve well. Find employees who are aligned with your purpose that you can really be an exciting, members of that team. And then the future's bright. Just keep adapting and growing with it.
It's great. Dave, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, your wisdom, your energy, and your purpose, really, truly, in the world. It's it is absolutely already making a difference, and I know that will only continue to amplify it. So
that's great.
Thanks so much,
Shannon. I enjoyed our time together.
You can find Dave and all of his good work at tugboatinstitute.com and find his new book, Another Way, just released from Harvard Business Review Press, on Bookshop, at your local bookstore, or anywhere books are sold. If you have a moment, please make sure that you've subscribed, forward this to a friend, and drop in a review. It makes a big difference to the success of the show and helps others find it.